So I think now we have most of the participants having joined. Also, some might still come. I think we can slowly start. And I would really like to welcome everyone to this event today called the Global Forest Sector and COVID-19, Navigating a Sustainable Future in an Economically and Socially Constrained World. My name is Sven Walter. I am Senior Forestry Officer at the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the FAO, and I'm also the Secretary of our Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries, the so-called ACSFI. So the ACSFI, the Advisory Committee, is today jointly organizing this event with the FAO Forest Technical Network. So we have here two different groups of people plus others joining. The advisory committee on the one side consists of some 20 leading private sector experts. They are coming from the forest product, forest industry, pulp and paper associations, and they provide guidance to us, to FAO, on concepts, approaches, and initiatives in the field of sustainable production and consumption of forest products. It's also a forum of dialogue between FAO and the private sector to identify strategic actions that promote sustainable forest management. On the other side, we have the Forest Technical Network, and that brings together FAO colleagues from headquarters here in Rome, from the regional, the sub-regional offices, and also from the country offices, from different departments, but all interested in forest-related issues, to discuss issues at stake, like today, the COVID impact on the forest sector, and also to share lessons. So I would like to really warmly welcome my FAO colleagues, our members of the ACSFI, and I saw that many have joined already, and also then the member organizations of the members of the ACSFI. So we have a wide range of different participants. Please note that the event is being recorded, and we will make this recording plus the presentations available on our website, and we will share with you, we have your email addresses, the links. As you can see, there's a chat function, so please share your comments, your questions, your suggestions with us through the chat function. Finally, I just want to also inform you that there will be other events co-organized by the advisory committee. The next meeting will already take place in the last week of June. It will be complementary to this one and is organized in a sequence of events actually organized by FAO on the topic of Building Back Better, COVID-19 pandemic recovery contributions from the forest sector. So that will even be a wider meeting compared to this one. Today's event is moderated, and he is already online, by Ross Hampton. He is our vice chair of the advisory committee, and he is also the chief executive officer of the Australian Forest Products Association. Ross will also introduce the excellent panel we will have today, and he will also give you then further information on the agenda. So Ross, wish you a good evening in Canberra, and you have the floor. Please take over.
Thank you very much, Sven. Can I just check, Sven, that you can hear and see me exactly right?
Yes, Alice, okay.
Let me please add my welcome, everyone, to Sven's welcome there, and thank you to our Secretariat at ACSFI that has produced this event. We have a global audience tonight, and it's terrific. Here in Canberra in Australia, it's actually a cold autumn night. Where you are, it is perhaps sunny and morning time. Fortunately, Australians have one greeting I can use whatever time zone you are in. So good day to you all of you. I'm sure, like me, you want to start tonight, as it is for me, by acknowledging that the COVID-19 pandemic has been a terrible tragedy for so many people around the world, and also to pay tribute to the frontline health and food workers who've stayed at their jobs, ensuring the rest of us could go into isolation. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts. The pandemic has truly been a global challenge across all our industries. But here's the thing. Whilst it separated us physically, staying in our homes and our borders and airports closed, I think somewhat surprisingly perhaps, it's in some ways brought us together on video calls like this one, together in gaining a better understanding perhaps of some of the things we really value. Our families, for example, good health is obvious, but also, as it turns out, forest products. It turns out that forestry things, the materials that we get from our forest industries, perhaps this is the first time in many years in some of our countries, have bubbled up in people's consciousness as truly essential in our daily lives. From the tissues, the sanitary products, biomedical products and materials, through to the cardboard packaging around the food in the supermarkets, and indeed the pallets which got that food into the supermarkets, through to the timber being used in emergency accommodation and pop-up hospitals. Forest industries have not been in isolation during COVID-19. They have been on the front line as well. So this seminar is about where to from here. As the world tentatively begins to plot the path back to something closer to normal life, what is a sustainable future for our industries in such an economically and socially constrained world? Now, to guide our journey, I'm very, very pleased to bring you over the next hour or so 5 extremely experienced, passionate, thoughtful, and respected voices who are going to bring different perspectives to these questions. You'll be hearing from Mr. Derek Niber, Chair of the International Council of Forest and Paper Associations, Mr. David Brand, CEO of New Forests, Mr. Mike May, VP Public Affairs, Futura Gene Susano, Dr. Jennifer Jenkins, VP and Chief Sustainability Officer at Enviva, and Mr. Howard Parry-Husband, the CEO of Pollinate. And to sum up and close the program, I will be calling on Ms. Karina Hakanson, Chair of the ACSFI. We asked our speakers to consider 2 big questions. How should the forest sector, our industries, and the FAO be responding to COVID-19 in the short, medium, and longer term? And how can FAO and the private sector develop opportunities for stronger collaboration to effectively promote sustainable forest-related consumption and production patterns and contribute to the SDGs in a post-COVID-19 world? So that's by way of introduction, and I'll just ensure that my first speaker, who's Derek Niber, is indeed all ready to go, and then I will introduce him, Sven.
I'm all set, Ross.
Well, many of you will know Derek, of course. He's the Forest Products Association of Canada President and CEO, has been for several years now. And Canada, of course, is one of our global powerhouses in forest industries right across the value chain. It offers so much in the way of innovation, in the way of leadership, and in the way of blending all those things we're going to talk about tonight. There are 600 Canadian forest communities in Canada. It's an enormously important part of that country. In addition, though, in July 2019, Derek was elected president of the International Council of Forest and Paper Associations, ACSFI. He chairs a group of forest product association leaders from 28 countries around the world. And we're going to ask Derek to make a few opening comments, as it were, to really get us underway. And Derek, I thought I would just mention as a lead-in to your talk that we saw Katy Perry recently. I'm sure everyone in the world saw this in an enormous toilet roll on the American Idol TV program. She was doing a concert. Now, I have to tell you that our pulp and paper and tissue makers in Australia were very, very happy when we shared this on social media. They don't normally feel like the most glamorous members of our forest industries community, but that happened, and I think it was emblematic of what I was talking about before, this bubbling into consciousness of what we do in forest industries. Over to you, Derek.
Thanks, Ross. I wanted to thank our counterparts at ACSFI and FAO for putting this on today. I think Ross has covered a lot of the bases. As he mentioned, in my day job, I lead the Forest Sector Association in Canada, but I also have the privilege of chairing this group of forest sector associations from around the world, from 28 countries around the world. It's an important information sharing network for us as we deal with things like COVID-19, as we deal with the sustainability challenges of tomorrow. So it's an honor to work with my colleagues from around the world. And I know in Canada, Sven talked about building back better, and there's a lot of talk about how can we build back better? How can we build back a more resilient economy? And how can forestry and forest products take their rightful place in helping drive economic recovery in each of our countries and collectively around the world? So we've got some great speakers from across different parts of the segment, from across different parts of the globe, and I'm really looking forward to listening to the discussion today. So thanks for the opportunity, and on behalf of ICFPA, I welcome you all.
Thanks very much, Derek. It's really great to be working so closely with this other peak body globally. We're going to go to David Brand now. David is probably known to many of you as well. He's the chair and CEO of New Forests. New Forests was founded in 2005. It's a sustainable forestry investment manager offering leading edge strategies in forestry, land management and conservation. And there's now more than US $4 billion in assets under its management across several countries, US, Australia, New Zealand, also in Southeast Asia. David has enormous experience, more than 35 years experience in timberland investment, forest management, science and public policy. He's dedicated and innovative. He's into responsible investment strategies in the forest sector that address climate change mitigation, community development, and expanding the use of sustainable renewable materials. David serves on the board of directors of the Washington, DC-based NGO Forest Trends and the board of trustees of Bangkok-based intergovernmental organisation Centre for People and Forests. David, I recall several years ago, I asked you if the demand was there for timber assets, timberland assets around the world, and we were talking about Australia at the time. And I remember you said to me that there were trillions of dollars in super and pension funds which would love to be in trees if they could find them. There was no shortage of money, you said, there was a shortage of trees. In a post-COVID world, I hope that your presentation will start to tell us a bit of what the balance might look like. David Brand.
Okay. Sorry, I just need to get my presentation up here. Okay, can everyone see that?
That's coming through now, I think, David. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thanks, Ross, for that introduction, and thanks to the FAO for the invitation to be here with you this evening. And let me also echo what Ross has said, that it's been a very difficult and stressful time, and I hope everyone is faring well in these challenging circumstances. Well, I'll talk briefly this evening on the forestry investment sector and the COVID-19 world, and how we see the world recovering and moving forward from this. And I'll just start with a brief introduction to our company. So New Forests is an investment management business. We're based in Sydney, Australia. We basically operate investment programs on behalf of our clients, who are primarily institutional investors. 75 to 80% of our capital comes from large defined benefit pension plans, and pension plans and other institutional investors tend to have long dated liabilities, and so owning long-term assets like forestry is very appropriate for them in terms of meeting their future needs to pay pensions or medical benefits or other types of long-term liabilities. Our company operates a three-strategy architecture. We have an Australia-New Zealand investment program. We have a program for Southeast Asia, and we also operate investments in the United States. We manage about 1 million hectares of forestry assets worth approximately $4 billion US. And as a company, I suppose from the start, we've had a very strong aspiration towards sustainability. We believe that forests can be an important part of the solution to major global issues like climate change and the conservation of biodiversity and provision of fresh water, as well as providing benefits to local regional communities. And we certainly believe strongly in the concept of shared value, that we want to deliver great outcomes to the communities where we operate, as well as great returns to our clients. Just quickly, our assets are spread across 6 countries. We have quite extensive forestry plantations in southern Australia and the North and South Island of New Zealand. We also are vertically integrated, operating 3 sawmills through one of our investments in Timberlink, Australia, and Timberlink, New Zealand. We also have wood chip mills and an international wood fiber trading business, New Forest Timber Products. In Asia, we operate plantation forestry businesses in Laos and Sabah in Malaysia. I think in Laos, we're probably the largest foreign investor in the forestry sector in that country. In West Kalimantan in Indonesia, we're a co-investor with an Indonesian firm in a large-scale timber latex clone plantation that is producing both latex and timber. In the United States, we have a large business in forest carbon offsets. We have something like 24 projects across the United States, many of those with Native American communities, and those are producing California carbon offsets for the California cap and trade market. We also manage about 200,000 acres of forests in Northern California that have both a carbon value as well as timber production. If we just start with the impact that COVID-19 has had on our operations, a quick tour around the world, if you will. The US, we've continued to operate through the pandemic. Forestry has been deemed an essential activity. And, we were expecting a strong year in terms of housing recovery in the US. That's certainly been set back by the pandemic, but there is some suggestion, just looking at some of the statistics today, that there's a bit of a green shoots beginning to show, but certainly not what we had expected. The printing and writing paper decline has been pushed harder with, schools shut down and people not working in offices, but still continued growth in things like tissues and packaging has continued. So in some ways, an acceleration of what was already occurring. Australia forestry was also carried on through the pandemic. It has been an essential activity, as Ross has said. Domestic construction over the last couple of months has actually kept going as people completed the projects that they were doing, but we're now concerned that the industry is really going to contract badly in the second half of the year. And we heard this morning that the government is now talking about some stimulus, which will be helpful in Australia. The export wood fiber markets, much of our hardwood wood fiber is sold into China and Japan. Those markets have softened, but I would say not substantially, and I think we still see strong long-term underlying fundamentals. New Zealand, we had a shutdown for about 1 month, and now we're back operating again. Chinese demand for softwood timber is rebounded, and prices are also rebounding. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago in New Zealand at Wharfgate, prices hit all-time record highs in New Zealand dollar terms. So short, sharp downturn, but now some good recovery. Laos, we were shut down, but now have started back up. Our particular operations are exporting veneers into Vietnam for plywood making, and then we also have the Sun dissolving pulp mill that we sell pulpwood to. Both those are operating strongly. Malaysia was down again, now starting to start up again. Markets rebounding. Indonesia still kind of working slowly. Our operation being in the rubber, the latex is severely depressed. The latex price is at very low levels, something like $1.10 for the benchmark natural rubber price. So that's a kind of a picture of the markets, kind of a bit up and down, but generally I would say in most cases already starting to show signs of recovery. But I would say one thing, you know, first and foremost, our forestry sector has been reaffirmed as an important, stable asset class with very low volatility. Forestry returns really come from a mix of the growth of the tree, which is a capital appreciation, and the harvesting of the timber, which is an income. And when we look at the value of forestry assets, we look to the future and consider the future markets and price path, and then we discount that back to the present. So the volatility of the assets is much lower than the volatility of the markets that they're exposed to. And so even in these severe disruptions, we still have capital appreciation of tree growth occurring. And then as the markets recover, we can again begin to harvest the timber and to meet the market demand. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really had very little impact on our market valuations of our assets. And you know, relative to many other assets that have had quite significant volatility, these have been good stabilizing factors in portfolios. Well, I've been through 4 now. This is my 4th one in my career, which started in probably 1978 or 79. You know, we see different sectors of the economy are affected differently. Here we've seen severe impacts on travel, hospitality, some physical retail stores, but on the other side, accelerated growth in things like digital media, online shopping, business digital transformation. And what we often see in, you know, coming out of a recession is a consolidation. Some of the over-leveraged or poorly market exposed businesses will tend to slow or go down, and then some of the more innovative, forward-looking businesses will tend to grow, consolidate, recapitalize the industry, and then we'll see kind of a fresh face on the industry as it comes out of the recession. And our strong belief as a business is as we come out of this COVID-19 pandemic, the issue of climate change will become a huge driver of the future economy, and that will continue to transform the forestry sector as we respond to that challenge. So we think there are 2 major dimensions of growth that will be driving the forestry sector forward. The first is the critical issue of land use and the role of land use in addressing climate change. I think there's a scientific consensus now that if we need to remove 43 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions over the next 30 years, probably a quarter of that is going to have to come out of land use. And there's 3 key elements. The first is protecting what we have left in terms of natural ecosystems. Will deliver about 4 billion tons a year of climate mitigation. Better managing working lands, both forestry and agriculture, will deliver about 5 billion tons a year of mitigation. And then restoration of degraded systems will deliver about 2 billion tons per annum. And so that is a huge recapitalization of the land use sector, and both conservation finance and production systems are going to have to be recapitalized to be more climate friendly, creating positive benefits and positive economic opportunities. The other side of that coin is the whole recognition of the need to transition towards a circular bioeconomy, and that's looking at the world being food, feed, building materials, energy materials, all coming out of biomass increasingly. These are low emission industries that can replace and support low emissions growth. And so if we think about the 2 elements together, with the need to expand and enhance our underlying forest production systems, and then to support that growing demand that will come out of the bioeconomy, I think that is really, our view is that that's the center of the future of the forestry sector, is that dynamic of these 2 drivers. So we think even before the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, already the change was very apparent across all the forestry sector of the world, and certainly in the forestry investment sector. There's been a real drive to sustainability metrics, understanding the role of forests that we're managing in climate mitigation, integrating conservation finance with production, and looking at climate change as an opportunity for business and investment. We're seeing significant trends in terms of the building materials, prefab construction, mass timber construction. These are going to continue to grow faster than traditional building materials. Again, the rise of wood fiber-based packaging, hygienic materials, and all other types of consumer goods coming from wood, fabrics, and so on. And ultimately, I think for developing countries, there is now this kind of building back better or green growth opportunity that can be seen as a way forward out of this pandemic. So for the FAO, I think it's also a tremendous opportunity. The FAO is so well positioned as an organization that is very information rich and could potentially be a central repository of information around how we might see the demand outlook for wood and wood fiber and wood materials out to 2050. And then on the other side, what's the supply side? Where could that supply be coming from to support that bioeconomy transition and deliver the sort of climate mitigation benefits that we need? We've had a lot of big top-down studies on the future of the world and how we need 900 million hectares of trees planted and so on and so forth. But somebody needs to do that bottom-up work. How do you actually implement that? There isn't 900 million hectares of empty land. This has all got to be done in partnership with communities. It's got to be done in a way that creates both conservation and economic benefits. And I think the FAO, with a deep network of work with countries all around the world, is uniquely placed to be able to do some of the thinking around this. So in conclusion, the forestry sector, I think, was already posed for substantial change when the COVID-19 pandemic hit us. We might lose 6 to 12 months, but the underlying trends towards natural climate solutions and the circular bioeconomy and enhanced sustainability measurements and reporting will not be diminished. We now need a roadmap to 2050 as we move to decarbonize the economy. What will demand look like? Where will supply come from? How can developing countries position themselves to participate in this new green growth opportunity? And as Ross said at the outset, it's not that we're lacking in capital, it's that we need to design these investment opportunities to bring that capital there. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, David Brand. That was really a compelling overview. Really, if we were not in a virtual seminar, if we were in a real seminar, there'd be a lot of applause right now. So David, I'm on behalf of the people watching, thank you so much. That was, in a sense, a real helicopter view, or even higher, really a spaceship view of some of the trees, dimensions of trees around the world. And Mike May also has something of a high level view. He's looking at issues of international cooperation and dialogue, and he's going to talk to us now. It'll be interesting to get this perspective from Dr. Mike May. Mike is Vice President of Public Affairs at Futura in Suzano. You don't need me to tell you that Suzano in Brazil is one of the world's largest pulp producers. Mike's focus really is on innovation governance frameworks, the UN 2030 Development Agenda, the public acceptance of science, technology transfer, as I said, international cooperation, and this idea of a creation of alliances between stakeholders. Mike delivers this thinking, these thoughts, and receives thinking from his involvement in the international arena. He's a member of the private sector mechanism to the UN Committee on Food Security. He's a member of the advisory group to the New Generation Plantations platform of WWF, known to many of us. Forest Dialogue, again, very well known, and was a member of the steering committee World Business Council for Sustainable Development Forest Solutions Group. And Mike, I know that you are you are focused and you have a lot of interest in this idea about international connectedness and connections and cooperation and collaboration. But to come back to our theme today, if you're not in Australia, the borders are closing down, aren't they? We've had all sorts of impacts immediately in terms of closed borders, and it seems a real rush towards protectionism and towards closed and different supply chains and towards countries wanting to be much more self-reliant. So over to you. We'd really be interested in your views on that.
Let me just share my screen and thank you, Ross, for the introduction, and special thanks to ACSFI for the invitation to participate in this important meeting. I'm glad to see that it's going to be followed through into a broader discussion inside FAO, again virtually during COFO, and I'm very excited about the potential for messages coming out of this sort of dialogue, going towards the public, policymakers, to everyone. And as David said, there's so much potential that the forestry sector has to offer. It's a question now of developing that narrative as the basis for getting this collaboration that Ross mentioned. So let me go into, there we go. I'm going to cover quite a few points, hopefully not too much overlap with other people. Briefly touch on the material and intangible impacts of COVID-19. Intangible impacts, in my view, are worth considering. And as Ross mentioned, this bubbling up of consciousness is changing people's perception of the way the world works or doesn't work as it doesn't now. And there are people's perception is changing. Context is everything. And let's see what the narrative coming out of this is. I've also given quite a lot of thought to the second point there. What are the entry points for FAO and private sector in this post-COVID-19 period that's coming up to us? Not just my own thoughts, but I've also researched quite widely through my network, asking people informally their own views on this. So hopefully it's not just my views. And then, let's define what success in this post-COVID world looks like for the forestry sector and for the people who benefit from its products and services and the people who work in it. It's an important sector, and there's an opportunity here to take, in my view, a much more prominent role in reshaping and renewing the world that people really want now. And brief discussion on the fourth point there, on the roles that we could all play in this proposed collaboration with FAO, and just a few concluding remarks. So the material impacts, and I think David's covered most of those. Yes, there's been a disruption of certain supply chains, certain parts, and particularly in the forestry sector in this perspective, certain parts of the sector have suffered, others have actually benefited. But one key thing is that the certainty's gone. Supply chains work when there's certainty of supply, where there's good demand, and that's how they function. A lot of that certainty's gone, and we're going to have to cope with that. Obviously, with any serious impact on global functioning, there are aftershocks. It's a bit like an earthquake, and there are many very critical issues that will need to be addressed in the coming years as a result of the impact of this pandemic. In particular, food security, that'll be high on the mind of FAO and its partners. Migration, employment, the list is endless. So there are many priorities, and I think part of the renewal phase will require a very coordinated effort in deploying these priorities and making sure that we're not just rushing into the renewal phase with a desire to tackle the most obvious first. One thing that's certainly come out of this is the primal role of government in managing a crisis such as this, and the evidence to date, and I'm sure there's going to be much is going to be written about this. You know, certain governments have managed better than others. I read this morning actually a commentary which said that, you know, if you look at it, some of the countries that did better were run by women. So, you know, there's a discussion on gender in the post-renewal phase, and maybe we should talk to those leaders who managed to keep their countries safer than others. And the need for international cooperation. Role of government, the other aspect of that in particular is countries that fared well were those where there was a robust public infrastructure. So, you know, this is raising questions about, you know, the trend that was a breakdown of public infrastructures. These are essential services and we need them. So more lessons learned from this as we go forward. Another clear impact is a realization of the linkages between science and environment, and some unexpected linkages. You know, the link between health and the economy, the environment and health. All of these hidden linkages that were there but were revealed by the crisis. And we need to consider all linkages. You know, we talk a lot about systems approaches, but very often we're only focusing on the most obvious. And when a crisis like this happens, it's those potentially redundant linkages that actually are required to hold the system together and stop it falling apart. This whole question of build back better, again, it's a huge opportunity, as David said, for the forestry sector. And again, cooperation, collaboration. We'll have to see what the political appetite for this is in the recovery, but certainly there's a narrative that we all can develop within the forestry sector of the value of what we're doing. And again, the question of where will the finance come from, conflicting priorities, and how that might impact particular recovery plans. Again, the impact more specifically on the forest sector, and talking briefly about, you know, Suzano and how Suzano responded to this. The response was immediate and empathic. The major priority was people's health and keeping people safe. Of the 15,000 people in the company, 4,000 office people are working from home and doing their jobs from home. People on the front lines in the mills, which have kept going in the forests, they are given all of the necessary support to make sure that they stay safe and well. The other major commitment is to society. You know, safeguarding salaries of employees was an important part of the step, but also there's been a lot of significant gestures towards the Brazilian society. For example, the company was heavily involved in bringing respirators into the country, which didn't have enough. Suzano is also supporting a company which makes respirators with a commitment to make 6,500 respirators in the near future. And that's 10% of the national capacity. And the other commitment was to keeping the business going. You know, as we know, we make essential products, sanitary products, home care, packaging, and you know, it's essential that business keeps going. So the response has been emphatic and very well organized, and I'm very proud to be part of that. And I'm sure, and from what I've discussed with other colleagues in other businesses around the world, we've all responded in in a empathic way. And like Ross said, there's this bubbling up of consciousness of people saying, well, let's do something. Something needs to be done. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on the intangible impacts, and there's this growing realization of system failure, the vulnerability of various aspects of the way the world was going, which we were all aware of, but suddenly it was thrown directly up. And again, context is everything. The perception of the fact that the global system was in difficulties, and this question of resilience, and people are questioning what is resilience and how do we build it? Is it an ingredient you add to a recipe? I think not. It's more, it's the result of a diverse, stakeholder base or species base, with the linkages between them all intact. So it's a whole systems thing. And that, again, coming back to the forestry sector, our role in building future global resilience, we know is key in the products that are produced, in the services that forestry provides in terms of carbon capture and environmental management. So resilience is going to be one of the key components of building back better, maybe the primary purpose of building back better. Again, we're coming more and more acutely aware of the quality of information. We can only act in the timeframes that people had to act as the pandemic unfolded. You can only act if you're provided with good quality information. And so again, coming to this potential collaboration with FAO, the building up quality databases of information so better decisions can be made, both long-term, short-term, and medium-term. The other key thing that's coming up is trust between people, between institutions. Everything has been key in this, in handling this pandemic, and will be key in developing the solutions to renew the global system. And again, trust and attitude, they determine behavior. And there's whilst the pandemic has been a major disaster, there's been many instances where we're seeing a real sense of community coming forward, and that's very refreshing in today's world. And that's the basis of collaboration. So that's the question now is, there's a lot of very positive things coming out of this, and in particular, I think behavioural change. And the question for us then is how do we build on this? How do we translate that? How do we translate that into action? And how do we actually translate into action some of these hidden linkages, the link between human health and environmental health, for example? So, we were asked to think about, how FAO can work more closely with the private sector, and again, from the discussions I've had with colleagues around the world, there's a strong appetite for cooperation with FAO, and this is very welcome. And I've got two. What I picked as I think opportunities that would both work and that would actually have an impact. And the first is obviously build back better together. And we need to draw on the entire forest stakeholder base. We're talking about a potential private sector FAO collaboration, but we need to bring in all of the players. Certification systems, all of the NGOs who have projects related to the communities that work in forestry areas, conservation, the whole range of stakeholders, and that creates the diversity, which is the basis for resilience. And then, you know, how do we design that process? Well, you know, look at what we're trying to achieve. How do we define what success looks like? And then work backwards to identify any gaps and identify a sequence of stages towards getting there. The other point of cooperation would be build back better informed. You know, joint research to create clear vision on supply and demand. We don't have very good data on supply and demand. And, you know, in designing a bioeconomy, a circular economy, where is the demand going to be? What are the products? And this, again, you know, if we have better data on this, we can make better decisions. Investors would be able to make more targeted investments. And again, and then that would help in the second point, provide the framework for you know, how to sustainably intensify the supply, and you know, how do we design responsible demand and consumption. You know, a bioeconomy is going to be based on sustainable production and consumption. And so, you know, this is all part of that narrative of developing the infrastructure for this renewal that will happen. And I believe overarching everything is the need for a very clear narrative for what we're trying to do. And again, context is everything. I think the forest sector has some fantastic stories to tell, and one of the few silver linings to the present crisis is that, you know, there's a much stronger awareness of the value of the products and services coming from the forestry sector, and so potentially there's a more enlightened audience for that narrative. Very briefly, just to cover, you know, what would success look like in if we could pull all this together. On the production side, on the left of the screen, we need a resilient production base. We will need to be more heavily dependent potentially on scientific and technological innovation. We will need clear guidance on carbon and externality pricing, the other externalities that currently we bear the costs of. And again, further development of the bioeconomy, circular economy. FAO has been doing a lot of work on this. Let's capitalize on that and get those plans into action. And again, the development path that we will go on needs to be divorced from fossil fuels. And you know, an interesting anecdote from this present situation is that, you know, we've actually had a forced uncoupling of the economy from environmental damage. You know, there's reports now of you know, changes in the environment as a result of this economic crisis. That was a forced uncoupling, and it's probably the first time it's happened in the present cycle of economic growth. What we need to put in place is a voluntary directed uncoupling to actually build on this impact that we've seen on the environment and the climate. On the right of the screen, in terms of sustainable consumption, resilient local markets. I think there's going to be a big focus in the future on local effects, and you know, through the narrative, through change in consumer attitudes that we're seeing. Again, you know, the message is I think that, you know, consumers are now much more conscious of the need for renewable, recyclable products from sustainable sources. So there's a need for co-development of this narrative on the real benefits of the forestry sector. And finally, attitudes to science in line with reality. I think one of the things we've seen again is the role of science in decision making during this crisis. So, you know, science has such an important impact on decisions.
1 minute still there, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah. Was that my 2-minute warning, or was that just stop?
That was your 1 minute warning.
Okay, that's good. I'm almost finished. Possible roles, we've given some thought to that. Clearly, there's a lot of synergies here in developing this narrative and developing the information we need to build this sustainable future. FAO on the side of FAO, clearly, you know, the convening power, the global reach, the consensus building strengths it has. And again, you know, in any collaborative effort, you know, the coordination impact of FAO with other organizations within the UN family, in particular UNFCCC and UNEP, particularly in this decade of restoration, which FAO co-hosts along with UNEP, and in CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Where did this crisis come from? People are now very conscious of the need to protect biodiversity, which potentially previously they weren't, and so let's build on that. And you know, we have a framework for building the future we want. That's called the SDGs, and many of the topics we're covering here are actually directly in line with the SDGs themselves. Industry, again, from its side, can bring in operational efficiencies, management skills, and the baseline operations. And of course, scientific and technological innovation can be brought into the whole mix. And again, you know, it's a collaboration between the sector and FAO. Civil society needs to be part of that, drawing in consumers, providing a balance in opinion, and of course, local action networks. And just 2 final points then. Resilience is the defining feature of success. And, you know, let's look forward to how this conversation develops and see FAO and the private sector taking leadership on, you know, building a knowledge base, building a narrative, and promoting cohesion between stakeholders. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was terrific. I think quite a few people and countries are using Build Back Better, but I do like your addition of together at the end of that, Build Back Better together. And lots of comments coming in on the chat. I do encourage you, we're going to hopefully end up with a short discussion time at the end, so please put questions into chat. Comments that have already come through are asking questions about whether behavioural change, for example, would continue. Is that going to last over COVID? Thanks, Jeremy. Nora's asking really about this overall One Health approach. How do we address all these linkages between human health and the health of the environment, Mike, as you were touching on, biodiversity, different scales, ecosystems, so on. Nora, these are great comments. It's a really good segue actually to our next speaker, because I think what David and Mike have really spelled out for us is there's no shortage of opportunity at all. I mean, both of them have given us a sense of that amazing opening that's going to be there, that was there before, and as they've both said, is going to be turbocharged, if anything, by this. But I think we've also heard from both David and Mike, and I think this is what Jennifer's going to talk to us about. That's not just an opportunity at any cost. That's not forest industries at any price. There is actually a right and wrong approach to all of this, an approach that supports the macro outcomes of the SDGs, but also delivers those things that we need in forest industries and the community needs. It's a Build Back Better Together conversation. Jennifer's going to pick this up for us. Dr. Jennifer Jenkins leads the team responsible for Enviva's environmental stewardship from guiding the development and implementation of policies that ensure the sustainability and traceability of the wood supply chain, to communicating with the public on sustainability topics and interacting with policymakers and other stakeholders on regulatory matters. Jennifer has a technical background in carbon cycle and ecosystem science, and she brings more than 20 years of experience working in this area in government, academia and the private sector on this incredibly important interface between forests and climate, which both our previous speakers have also touched on. Jennifer holds too many degrees for me to name. Suffice to say, she's incredibly well credentialed in that regard. And Jennifer, you make a provocative point in your conversation that you're going to have with us about good biomass, which of course presumes that there is also good forestry underpinning that biomass. Really looking forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen here if I can. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try this. Hopefully I can make it work. How does, okay, everyone can see?
Great.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks a lot. Good day, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation and to discuss these critical issues with my global colleagues. Thank you for that great introduction. I am Jennifer Jenkins, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for Enviva. Enviva is the world's largest producer of industrial grade wood pellets, which are used as a substitute for fossil fuel in heat and power applications. And as you said, that's a critical link between climate and forestry. I don't need to introduce myself today. You did a great job. Thanks a lot, Ross. And yeah, me and my team are broadly responsible, as you said, for the environmental stewardship at Enviva. And I do want to go a little bit. I'm going to start with a few slides just to introduce Enviva and the wood pellet industry, because I think many people may not be familiar. Enviva is a relatively new company whose mission is to fight climate change by displacing coal and other fossil fuels and contributing to strong forest products markets, which ultimately leads to growing more trees in a nutshell. So our mission is summarized here. In order to fight climate change, we do work to displace coal, and through our role in creating strong markets for forest products, we also help to grow more trees. A little bit about our supply chain and how we make pellets. In our manufacturing process, we take low value wood and we turn it into pellets at our manufacturing facilities, which we then transport by rail or by truck to our ports in the US, where they are shipped to customers. And so we produce about 3.5 million tons of pellets annually from our 8 mills located in the Southeast US. And you can see those here. Our pellets are then shipped from 4 Southeast US ports to our customers around the world who use them as a substitute, as I mentioned, for fossil fuel and heat and power. Pellets are a low carbon substitute for fossil fuels, so our customers are typically located in countries or regions with policies that do commit them to mandatory greenhouse gas reductions. And so that's where the climate link comes in. And now, now having gotten that introduction, sort of out of the way, let me move to a conversation about climate change and what FAO and forests, in my view, should do in order to get us to our 1.5 degree targets. Drastic emission cuts are needed, and they're needed immediately. This isn't a surprise. We've known this for years. Now we have an opportunity with COVID and the Build Back Better movement. We'll have to rebuild anyway as our economies begin to recover from the shutdown that was induced by COVID. So, hopefully, as the other speakers have said, we can rebuild in a way that accelerates our progress toward the 1.5 degree targets that we know we need. So this slide from the IPCC shows 4 candidate pathways for getting to that 1.5 degree target. And just what I want to point out is that we do need negative emissions to get to the end goal. Whether those negative emissions come from sequestration in the forest, in the LULUCF sector, or they come from bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, it doesn't, the forest sector is key. And for many if not all of those pathways, bioenergy, also from the forest, plays an important part. But as Ross indicated, not all biomass used for bioenergy is good biomass. Good biomass must have greenhouse gas benefits and should benefit the forest, but in order for those benefits to be realized, it has to have, in our view, the following characteristics. The first one is good biomass should be made from low-value wood that is a byproduct of a sawmill operation or a planned traditional timber harvest. And so when that biomass is delivered directly from the forest, it can include tops, limbs, thinnings, or low-value smaller trees that don't have another market. When it comes in as a byproduct of sawmill operations, it will be classified as secondary residues like sawdust and shavings from industrial processing. Key thing, good biomass is not made from larger high-value trees that instead could be used for a longer-lived product. It should come from a region where forest carbon stocks are stable or increasing. It should come from harvest practices that safeguard biodiversity and other environmental values. It should come from a forest that is returned to forest after harvest and not from land that will be converted to another use like agriculture or development. So these are the characteristics of good biomass as we see it, and no matter where in the world it comes from, as long as the biomass meets these criteria, it should be climate positive. And just a quick note, there's a lot more on this in our white paper, and sort of this, I encourage you to take a look if you're interested. This paper will give the basis for the description of good biomass with scientific justification and more detailed rationale. There's a problem though. The role of bioenergy in helping to solve the global climate puzzle is uncertain, really because of a kind of a battle and disagreement between two opposing camps. And on biomass, the environmental community is engaged in a heated battle between these two groups. And I'm gonna just sort of be a little provocative. I'll call them the purists and the pragmatists. And this is really important because getting this wrong could mean there's less forest, which we all agree is essential to meeting the 1.5 degree goal. And delay in getting it right means, due to conflict and failure to reach consensus, means we're going to be effectively stalled. So the crazy thing is that we all agree on the goal, right? We all agree that the goal is to limit the increase in global mean temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, increase carbon storage and reliance on renewables, reduce reliance on fossil fuels, facilitate overall better energy efficiency and stability. We all agree on this. What we disagree on is how we're going to get there. And really, it has to do with how to use the forest. So essentially, the purist camp finds that bio-based solutions are simply inappropriate because of the potential disbenefits. And you can see on the left here sort of examples of that point of view. And pragmatists find that reasoned substitution and balanced use with constraints is the best way to proceed. So, the purist point of view on the left here basically make, the people who take this point of view are making statements that kind of negate the fact that the economic value of forests is what enables them to grow and thrive. Essentially, purists seem to find that human use and conservation or increased sequestration are impossible to reconcile. On the other hand, the pragmatists, as represented by the group of scientists in the IPCC, especially the group that produced this special report on climate change and land, find that, human use of forest products, especially when that use is substituting for fossil-based products and also leading to carbon storage on land, is consistent with climate change mitigation. And so we try to figure this out and get stakeholder consensus through the regulatory process in many places where, frankly, at risk of becoming stalled. And bioenergy may not reach its full potential, and we're wasting valuable time. And this is where the FAO, in my view, comes in. In order to further the bioeconomy, the circular bioeconomy, and break this deadlock between purists and pragmatists, clarity is needed about these three things. Clarity and education really are needed about these three things. And forest economics, natural climate solutions and offsetting, and then regulatory best practices. And this clarity will enable additional public education as well as regulatory support, and will lead to the good positive outcomes that we know are possible in the forest sector. This will enable us to continue to translate scientific principles like the IPCC's examples and suggestions into action on climate. And let me just take each one of these in turn. So the first topic is forest economics. People don't really understand fully the principles of supply and demand, and I know other speakers have referred to this as those principles relate to forestry and forest products. And it's strange because I think people often understand those dynamics as they relate to other agricultural commodities like corn or chickens. The more demand you have for those things, the more of those things you have. And so the same thing is true for trees, but that seems to be sort of not fully and well understood. FAO can contribute to this conversation, in my view, by contributing and conducting research, analysis, and education. So on supply and demand, questions like, how much productive use can there be in a forest region before there is danger of losing forest cover? FAO could define sink capacity as well as the production capacity for forests worldwide. Other questions, what kinds of markets lead to increased or decreased sink capacity? What kinds of ownership and management structures are conducive to enhance productivity and economic development? Another question related to sustainable forest management, what does that look like in forests around the world? How can we simultaneously achieve SDG 13 on climate action and SDG 15, life on land with protection of diversity? How do we translate this work on supply and demand, putting it together with best practices about biodiversity into a sustainable management system? And how do we do this, through a worldwide lens? On natural climate solutions and offsetting, there's sort of, as I mentioned before, there's incredulity among non-experts about the complementarity between product extraction and carbon storage. So, but we also know that research shows that the two are not mutually exclusive, and that should be explored and quantified and well understood. So getting this right involves answering questions like, what is the right balance between carbon storage and product extraction? How does this balance change, perhaps, from landscape to landscape? What is the achievable greenhouse gas benefit, forest by forest, biome by biome, from this forest system that provides products for human use while also providing the ecosystem services that we all rely on for survival and enhance climate mitigation? Can we scale enough? What is the appropriate way to apply this knowledge in a worldwide policy context? And then with respect to measuring and monitoring, can FAO research contribute to providing an independent and trusted system for small scale monitoring of carbon sink capacity and worldwide? I think the existence of a system like that, an accessible, inexpensive system, is a barrier today to wide adoption of carbon credits by all kinds of landowners, especially small ones. And so easy access to measurement and monitoring might unlock carbon credit potential that's currently going unused. And then lastly, in terms of regulatory best practices, how do we create and endorse a global system of regulatory best practices? In many ways, this stems from the first two. As we translate scientific principles about forest economics, sustainable management, and natural climate solutions into regulatory policy, it feels like we need to help regulators through the complexity by developing consensus ourselves on best practices for forest products. So this would involve, for FAO, answering questions like, how can we effectively create multi-stakeholder dialogue to find a way between the purists and the pragmatists? This dialogue might provide guideposts for what constitutes high conservation value, or decisions about allocating land between different uses, like conservation versus working forest. And once we've created that dialogue and achieved consensus, we can translate the best science and outcomes of that dialogue into regulatory systems in multiple scales. So yeah, and I feel like this is a good role for FAO to work with regulators to create guidelines that can be used and applied globally, and then communicating about them in order to achieve the SDGs for people around the world. And then after all of that, what we ought to have is a sustainable, circular, bio-based economy with popular and public support, in which products are allocated preferentially to their most carbon-friendly use, and strong markets for these products enables landowners to continue to hold and add value to their forest. So that's my vision for the post-COVID economy. and how I think FAO can get us there. Thanks.
Again, after each of these speakers, I think we can hear the applause around the world, really. So thank you so much, Jennifer. That segued beautifully off Mike's talk. And indeed, I think we can see the pieces of this large puzzle coming together, can't we? Those on the call tonight, or today, we know that there is demand for forest industries, and David's told us that's going to increase. Nothing about the pandemic is going to change that. And of course, Mike's added in his thoughts about some of those enabling intersections that can help make that take place, and some of the considerations. But of course, as Jennifer's just said, then it's not. There's no such thing as just good or just bad in this space. Anything that involves the Earth's precious resources has to be managed in the right way and with the right regulatory and policy drivers to move behaviour. And moving behaviour and people's thinking, and perhaps dealing with some of those roadblocks or blockages that Jennifer was talking to us about, is really something that Howard Parry Husbands does every day of the week. Howard is the CEO of Pollinate, and that's one of Australia's leading strategic consultancies, and he's an expert in market research, specialising in branding, innovation and communications development, as well as 2 decades developing brand, marketing and innovation strategies for many of the world's leading brands, from Nike to Google. Howard has conducted market and social research across a wide range of forestry issues, from public perceptions of forests, forestry and wood, changes in resource management practices, endangered species conservation, social licence and social purpose, consumer demand for wood as a building material, CLT and engineered wood, biophilia and communication strategies. I've heard Howard speak and seen some of his work, and Howard doesn't just think outside a square, he thinks outside a cube. Howard, you're always provocative in a very nice way, and I know you're going to be provocative tonight. Encourage us to think outside the cube about ways that we might make some of these breakthroughs to enable us to get to the sort of places that the other speakers have talked about. Thanks, Howard.
Fabulous. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ross. I'm just going to check if you can hear me clearly. Give us a quick thumbs up if you would. Thank you, Ross. That's all great. Okay, so I'll share screen in just a second, but I just wanted to first of all extend my thanks to Sven, the ACSFI, and obviously everybody, the FAO, and everybody who's dialed in today, tonight, wherever you are, whatever time it is, for inviting me to speak here. So let me just share my screen, pull up the presentation, and then we should be good to go. Okay, just a moment. Okay, let's put that on slideshow. Jolly good. All good. Okay, folks. The first thing I want to talk about is that, and it's been covered by a lot of the other speakers, that the COVID-19 epidemic has obviously impacted a lot of businesses, and forestry is not immune. But more broadly, what we're seeing across all businesses prior to COVID-19 as well, is that society's expectations with regard to sustainability or equity are often out of line with business practices. Whether those business practices are sustainable or not is a moot point. If society's perception is that they are not, then simply they are not. So the question that's absorbing many organizations, certainly that I work with, and I think across many sectors, is quite simply, how can business be a force for good? And how can business build back a better, sustainable environment and society? So when we turn to where we currently are with the COVID epidemic, we obviously see health and economic concerns have peaked with COVID-19. But environmental concerns have also stayed very high. The 2 images on your right here, the top one is taken from Harvard University. It's one of many articles across the scientific, economic and policy sectors that links coronavirus with climate change and other ecological issues. The data at the bottom right there, that little line chart, is data we collect here in Australia. We've done that for about 12 years now. This is the first time we've seen a spike in concern for the economy as severe as we've seen it in any time we've been doing the research. But that's not the point. The point is that it's accompanied by a similar rise, or indeed some rise, in ecological concerns and societal concerns. What's going on here is that society is beginning to see the entire system as the problem, where it used to be a dichotomy or a false dichotomy between environment and, say, the economy. Now they're seeing the entire system as somehow the problem. This very much mirrors David Brand from the New Forest, the first speaker you had today, talking about the issue of climate change will become a huge driver of the economy post COVID-19. And all the indicators at the moment from the consumer data that we see would absolutely support that point from David earlier. And forestry is involved across a lot of the system, a lot of that system that society sees as really the problem. The many complex issues and conflicts that frame forestry in different countries span all of these Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG goals. And that's why a common narrative based on a shared vision and also understanding of success is absolutely crucial for forestry to be part of the solution. The huge diversity of forest systems actually makes it very easy to divide forestry into different issues or paint much of forestry as a problem depending on your perspective on forestry. But it is also for this reason, it is also this diversity that means forestry must stand together and offer a common inclusive solution to the need to build back better. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted forestry in terms of economy, society, and ecology, just as it has impacted on pretty much every single aspect of the economy in pretty much every single country. But this is a stages of recovery model. I've borrowed this one from the Red Cross, so I've adapted it here very simply. But the way to look at any crisis is that they follow these 4 stages. There's the heroic phase, then the honeymoon phase, followed by the disillusionment phase, and finally the reconstruction phase. And of course, each one in temporal scales, it gets so much bigger. The heroic phase could be just days, weeks, or even months. And then the honeymoon phase, a bit longer. Disillusionment can last for years, and reconstruction can last for decades. So all crises tend to progress through these 4 stages with these almost exponentially longer time spans. I've put the box there around the last 2, disillusionment and reconstruction, because forestry and forest products are almost uniquely well placed to assist in mitigating the disillusionment phase and catalyzing the reconstruction phase. So stage 3, disillusionment, and stage 4, reconstruction, are nearly perfectly poised in a post-COVID-19 world with a society globally concerned about the system and environmental concerns at the forefront of that. Forestry is perfectly well poised to address that. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to Kairos. Now, Jennifer Jenkins stated in her fabulous presentation there that reviewing the need to tackle climate change is going to be crucial after COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has created this opportune moment for forestry to position itself as a driving force to transform society for the better. And you're asking, well, what is Kairos? Well, much of global society around the world has become overly obsessed with chronological linear time. And we have forgotten how the ancient Greeks 4,000 years ago also recognized how time moves in cycles and how opportune moments occurred when presented with fortuitous alignment of situations for fortuitous events. This is the Kairos, when things align in a way that we have an opportunity to pivot, if you like, to change direction, to transform what we're doing. Now, this sense of time that the Greeks had 4,000 years ago and that much of society has forgotten, this sense of time as a fluid continuum, is also exactly analogous with Aboriginal meanings of time as a continuum of past and future and present, all essentially stacked and linked to the land. In Australia, it's known as the dreaming. This art from Clifford Possum Chapalchari, the first Indigenous man to be given a solo exhibition in a European art gallery, is exactly an expression of the dreaming. And that is the Kairos that currently faces itself as an opportunity for forestry. So forestry can address the disillusionment, the 3rd stage of disaster recovery, by manifestly demonstrating its role in reconstruction, the opportunity to build a better future, and the 4th part, the disillusionment stage. It is this ancient wisdom, the common wisdom shared by the ancient Greeks and by humanity's most ancient living culture, Aboriginal Australia. This is the inspiration that can address the opportunity for forestry. Because forestry can literally grow back a stronger, and more resilient system and lead the reconstruction to build back better. Now, we're probably asking the question, well, that's fine, we've looked at different interpretations of time, but how does it actually work? What does it look like? Well, why can forestry lead the reconstruction? The first thing is right here, because planting trees is of itself a powerful symbol of hope. Planting trees and forests are the living embodiment of a future promise. Increasing forestry is a portent of a better tomorrow. So of itself, the very material that is forests and forestry represent hope for the future, which of course is a powerful and galvanizing force. And at the same time, if we think about forests and forestry in terms of the magnitude of transformative solutions that it offers, it is literally unmatched by any other natural resource. Think about employment and high-tech innovation and the very foundation of the bioeconomy, the future bioeconomy that was discussed a number of times earlier, the circular economy. That is absolutely a role for forestry. Livelihoods that protect indigenous culture and provide material for homes and shelter. Engineered wood that can build structures that we could not previously even imagine prior to engineered wood. Then we have carbon sequestration, climate change mitigation, ecological species conservation, biophilia, well-being and recreation, the resilience of our vital water, soil and agricultural systems, and untold and as yet undiscovered opportunities across virtually every aspect of society and economy. Forestry and forests represent a magnificent opportunity to build back better with the ultimate renewable. And the ultimate renewable is a frame that was developed here in Australia using co-creation, because forestry is a resource that's renewable. Forests and woods are the ultimate renewable. This strategic positioning was developed using co-design and co-creation with lots of different stakeholders, people with very different views of forestry, both within the industry and across society. And we think this sort of positioning has the potential to change perceptions of forestry across the world. So the real question is, well, how do we actually make this shift in forestry's fortunes happen? How do we create the momentum for forests and forestry to take that lead role in building back better? I think David Brand's point about the bottom-up approach to building back better. Well, there's three key ingredients that I think we should consider. And at this point, it's interesting to see the congruence of my fellow speakers' presentations. I should say at this point, I hadn't seen them prior to this, so it's very interesting, because the first thing I was going to recommend was data. We can't actually go anywhere. We cannot make evidence-based decisions, and we certainly cannot be taken seriously in the boardrooms of businesses and organizations across the world, and certainly by governments and policymakers, in the absence of good, reliable, consistent data. Data that is consistent, robust, timely, and comparable, but perhaps most importantly, shared. Now, what I'm showing you here is some data. These are actually scorecards that was developed by Pollinate, working with the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And I'm sharing them here. I've taken the actual scores off because of confidentiality. But up until about 9 months ago, there was no collective sharing of a lot of data around beef consumption or attitudes to beef with regard to what was driving increases or decreases around concerns around things like animal welfare or environmental issues or climate change. So what we did here is every single country collected data in different ways, different attitudes, but until last year it had never been centralized or shared. Now, we developed a simple Chatham House approach. Every country has a scorecard. These are 4 countries' scorecards. They are shared with everyone, but the specific data that sits behind these in detail remains confidential. So everybody can see how everybody's doing, and they might be slightly different data sets, but we now have for the first time a global picture of the drivers of societal demand or decline. And we can start to see for the first time whether there are consistent cohorts of concern, whether there are consistent issues and the priorities of those issues and how they're driving different influences on the sector. Now, from this data, consistent feedback loops were identified. We could apply systems thinking and look at the entire system, and for the first time start to develop narratives, hopeful narratives, and also start to influence behavior change and land use management change. The reason I put this up here, it is the collection of common data that is the foundation of a coherent global strategy. This is still currently under development with the red meat sector. And I'd suggest it's a very simple basis for us to think about the transformation that the forestry sector could also enjoy. The second point that I wanted to make, again, which is echoed by many of the other speakers, is cooperation. I'm going to use a quote here, which apparently is an African quote, which I've used many times before. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go further, go together. And again, I'm in agreement here with Mike May from Cesano about trust and attitude matter. Because if data is the foundation of a coherent strategy, then collaboration is the only way to build a strong house on that foundation. Now, with the previous example, the GRSB was the central body that shared the data, and obviously FAO has a very powerful position in the world of forestry as that platform of data. And I think it's important here to pick up on Jennifer Jenkins' point from NVIVA, which is whether it's a purist or pragmatist approach to forestry and the criticism that comes with either perspective, if we all agree on the goals, then frankly, we should be able to cooperate towards some sort of solution, or perhaps solutions. Give them all a go, and eventually the one that best achieves the goals will certainly probably get the most votes, as it were. But finally, it's all well and good to have data, it's all well and good to have cooperation, but we also need a how. We need a strategic plan, a framework or a guide that will translate the pragmatic and perhaps also the purist hope into opportunity and action and into leadership. So my third point here is the importance of having a strategic plan. This process I have in front of you here is the process that we've employed, you saw previously with the Ultimate Renewable. It's a multi-stakeholder consensus building approach. It's a pretty straightforward approach, but you get all your different stakeholders around the table. Exactly as Jennifer Jenkins said, we need consensus building, multi-stakeholder approaches in order to drive effective communication. This is a simple 4-stage model. You change perceptions first. You reframe public perceptions of forestry so they can see that forestry is a force for good, if you like, a change for good. At the same time, you address the practices that concern people or concern investors. And you said about putting tangible changes in behavior and process or practices in place. You do good. Now you have a change in perception, but also a perception of changes in practices. You also need that data that I discussed 2 charts ago, the measurement and evaluation of specific activity. We actually need to report on the good. We need to report on the bad. We need to be honest. When things don't work, we change it, we stop it, we say sorry. But we need to measure and evaluate what's worked and what hasn't worked that supports this change in perception and change in practices. And finally, there's a story to be told. There needs to be a good narrative, and that narrative should be identified across those 3 levels. It may be the change in perception narrative, or it may be actually measuring and evaluating. It doesn't actually matter where it comes from. The key really here in sum is it's not enough just to create hope that forestry can create a new economy based on nature-based solutions as the ultimate renewable. We need to translate into action. People need to see tangible proof of behavior change, biodiversity, conservation, sustainable development, climate change mitigation. There needs to be rigorous measurement and evaluation, a framework of data and reporting and accountability. And still the common strategy, such as the ultimate renewable, needs to be translated into every language to be relevant. It needs to make sense in each and every country and to every member of society. We need to address the specific conflicts and concerns and opportunities that are unique to every society, every culture, and every forest system on Earth. The key thing I want to implore everybody with today and tonight is that Kairos does not last. Investment from everyone is urgently needed to realize the goal of evidence-based, globally coordinated, transformative, strategic planning for the forestry sector. Because alone of all the materials and alone of all the natural systems, only the ultimate renewable is perfectly placed to build back better together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Howard. Marvellous presentation as ever. I've heard before, but I'm going to really hang on to that terrific advice that if you want to go fast, go alone. Want to go far, want to achieve great things, go together, which of course is what the whole UN process is about, and what FAO is about, it's what the ACSFI is about, and of course it's what the SDGs are about as well. Howard, we're going to go into a bit of a question and answer time now, a discussion, and if anyone wants to try to ask the panelists a question, please put it in the chat and we'll try to grab it up and put it to them. But I'll start with you, Howard, and just ask, when you talk about a limited period of time, could you have a punt at what you mean? Like, are you talking weeks or hours or years? In these terms of a potential change time, what are you thinking there?
Yes, great question, Ross. Look, there's certainly quite a lot being written at the moment about the gaslighting of society, how a lot of vested interests, let's think of them as, if you like, climate change skeptics on the one hand, or people who will lose out if a bioeconomy does take off. But this gaslighting is effectively going to kick in to say to people, you know, come back and enjoy the life you had, and you've never had it so good, and so on. And that would be potentially very dangerous for a lot of society. The flip side is that this has been an extraordinarily big crisis. We are talking about a massive humanitarian toll in terms of suffering and obviously loss of life, as well as the economic ramifications. So the issue is there will be a lot of pressure to quickly go back, or snap back is even some of the language I've heard. It makes no sense because people don't want to go back. A lot of the research, we review hundreds of pieces of research globally. Most people have actually taken a step back and gone, look, this is really bad, and I wouldn't have asked it to happen, but now it has happened. I've really started to reassess my life and life on Earth, and I'm wondering whether we should go back. We should be going forward. So there's a tension now between vested interests who wanted to go back, and society who've got an unease about going back, and the tension is driven by the magnitude of the crisis, which is huge. I would suggest, to be perfectly honest, we have a matter of weeks and months, less than years. We have one thing in our favour: forests tend to last a long time. And if there's one thing we're good at with forestry, it's long-term planning. So as long as we can get enough momentum going, the higher the trajectory we get, I think, from here, the sooner we'll achieve our objective.
Thanks, Howard. Just to the other panelists, I'd be keen to get any other observations from any of you on this idea of a state of transition that we might be in post the virus, and what your observations about it might be. I know it's a bit hard to do this, but if you put your hand, if you just put your hand up, I'll be able to call on you and we'll unmute you. Okay, Jennifer, thanks so much.
No, thanks for that, Howard. I agree with that 100%. I mean, I think this is an opportunity. I do think people are stepping back and reevaluating what's important, right, for us, for me, for my own health, for my family's health, for society's health. I think it's causing us to just really step back and reevaluate everything, which to me is good news, right? Because there are a lot of things that we can fix, right? And so if we can seize that opportunity and do the education and data analysis and communication that is needed in order to really move society forward. And I'm going to put society, the public, and regulators and policymakers in that same camp. Then I think we can really achieve great things. But we need everyone to work together. So to me, it's sort of initiating quickly those multi-stakeholder dialogues and that communication effort and that data analysis immediately.
And we need to do it together. I think that's the overarching message that everyone's given us about this. We're all geese flying in formation. As I understand it, Howard, the lift of that group of geese is far greater than the individuals on their own. I think that's what that analogy is about, isn't it?
Indeed.
Mike, I'll come to David, then I'll go to Mike. David.
Yeah, I guess, one of the things that's been amazing to me is we sit here, working from home and so on, and the economy's in extreme strife. The price of oil went negative. And yet here you have Shell, Repsol, BP announcing they will be completely carbon neutral companies by 2050. You've got Microsoft saying it will become carbon negative for its lifetime from its moment of inception by 2050. And Amazon and Google, all of them are talking about massive interventions in terms of climate change mitigation. And guess what they're all saying is nature-based solutions is to be a central part of this. And I was on a call with the CEO of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development a week or so ago. And there's a guy from the cement industry saying, how can I get to be carbon neutral by 2050? I don't think I have the technologies. And he said, come and talk to us. Everyone needs to have an element of natural climate solutions as part of their business model going forward. And it's like, this is in the depth of a recession. This is the conversation that's going on. And to me, when we come out of this, this is like a slingshot. And, you know, it's really exciting. I mean, I've been in forestry a long time, but, you know, we were a sideshow and now we're on the center stage. And, you know, I think what we all need to collectively do is seize this opportunity and build this kind of sustainable economy with forestry at the center.
I'll ask you a hard follow-up question, David, because you probably spend more time contemplating this than anyone else on the call. We hear about all of these Fortune 500 companies, and we hear about their interest in forestry, particularly, as you say, nature-based solutions to their global challenge, usually across their whole supply chain of trying to get to those carbon neutral goals. Have we got capacity in forestry internationally to meet that demand?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, you know, and that's the bottom up question is it's when you start from the top up and you say we have to deal with 43 billion tons of emissions and we need a quarter of that from the land use, and then you start going down to how you do it. That's the business model that we need to be thinking about. And how do you create almost like a global coalition of effort, you know, with absolutely rigorous carbon accounting, absolutely localized models that work with communities to ensure that this is building local economic benefits? How do you get the, you know, scale and capacity to do this, harnessing everyone together? And that's certainly what we're talking about as a company is this is the big investment challenge, and how can we be part of that? And I think the whole forestry sector, you know, it's just an amazing opportunity.
Thanks for that. Back to you briefly, Jenny.
But I mean, to that question, I think there's also that's where the data comes in, right? So I think we will need to understand whether there is sink capacity, right? And what is that sink capacity, right? I think that's one of the data gaps that we've identified. Is what is the balance between sequestration capacity and forest productivity potential, and how does that all play into all of the credits and you know, offsets that companies like the cement company are going to need.
Yeah. The two other areas of question that are really bubbling to the surface. I'll come to Mike, I think, because he's provoked really one with his comment about women in leadership, which is, of course, I think if I'm getting it right, it's a SDG 5 is the one about that, and it's got a few bravos out there in chat world, Mike. But I think it's really a question about that, but also about behavioural change and whether a few people have been saying privately, you know, is this going to last? Again, it's sort of thing Howard was talking to us about. What's your view on that? Are we, you know, are things really changing? And in relation to leadership of women, is that something you think might be given a real boost out of this?
Sorry, I was waiting to be unmuted. I did that myself. The question of can behavioural change last? I agree with Howard. I think, I mean, and he's obviously done the research, you know, asking people. I think it can, or at least I'm optimistic it can. People do not want to go back. I mean, you know, people have been changed by this, and you know, I think there's so much momentum now to actually, you know, create a better world as a result of this. We don't want to go back. That certain things can change. So, you know, I think prior to this there was a momentum towards sustainability and equality, but now this has really pushed a lot of things that many people took for granted. It's really pushed them right to the forefront as issues that could have real value. I mean, give the example of biodiversity. For many years, we were struggling with, how do you assign a monetary value to biodiversity so that we can actually measure the results or the impact of actually protecting species? And it became a very difficult conversation because you can't actually assign a monetary value. But we've just had the best demonstration that if you don't look after the environment and you don't, stop encroaching on forests, the source of this pandemic, as many experts agree, was encroachment on biodiversity. And, and it's not the first time. There was Ebola, there was AIDS, and it will happen again. So I think, I think there'll be some real winners in this. And I my comment about women leadership, many companies were saying, yes, we're going to have so many women in leadership roles. And I think, well, a lot of these statements will actually take on some substance now, on these things like gender issues and biodiversity that were not the core priorities. When you look at media coverage of climate change, for example, it hits the headlines. Media coverage of biodiversity, it wasn't of great value to people, but now it is. And one of the other impacts, I mean, Howard mentioned this term biophilia, the link we have with nature. I think most people would agree that the first thing they want to do when they get out of confinement is go and sit in some green space somewhere and actually get back their contact with nature. So I think people are changed, and the question is how do we build on that? How do we capture it and translate it into the plan of reconstruction?
Howard, I'm going to call on you. I want to mention to Derek that I'm going to call on him as well for a final observation after Howard. Go ahead, Howard.
I just wanted to build on Mike's point there, and from your question. There is a genuine problem here, is that people need to be led. There is a momentum, but it is actually just as capable of translating into anxiety and depression and wallowing and a fizzle as much as it is as a galvanizing force for forestry. People need to be led, and there is an absolute dearth, a failure of leadership globally at the moment on exactly these issues. There is a miasma of no planning. No real government at all across the world has any good plan for this moving forward. And it's really important. Society has an enormous amount of potential to galvanize behind leadership, but we need leadership. There's a really good point here, which is how do we demonstrate willingness? One of the questions in the chat. We demonstrate willingness by, number one, setting goals. And number two, establishing the data, as all of us have said, that produce accountability. At that point, everybody says, all right then, forestry, you've taken the lead, you've stepped forward, you've said, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to be a force to drive the bioeconomy and transform the world. We're not going back. And here, measure us on what we're going to do. But you also need to develop the complete communications that make it really easy for people. They don't care about how many forests there are, carbon sequestration. They don't know what it means. So you set goals that make it easy. You pull in things like the pulp and paper sector, and you say, make it out of paper, not plastic. And the whole planet says, boom, where are you, forests? So you go, paper, not plastic. Here's where we need all the forests. Can we have a hell of a lot of investment, please? We're going to transform the entire planet as soon as we possibly can. That's the sort of thinking we need to put in place in a really simple way. But it starts with leadership. It's everybody listening in now. We have to step forward.
As ever, right on the money, Howard. Derek, I hope you're, yeah, there he is. We had one of the questions that I'm sorry for all of those who put questions up. I'm just not going to have time to get to them all, but Andrew Large asked one that I wanted to throw to you, Derek, which is really how does the pulp and paper sector fit into this conversation, just wearing your hat there for the pulp and paper group?
Yeah, I don't think in Canada and around the world, I don't think our pulp and paper sector has been so highly profiled when it comes to the essential products that we're making. And I know in Canada, early in the pandemic, our entire forestry supply chain was defined or designated as essential, which allowed us to continue to keep most of our operations operating in Canada. I think, there's been a lot of talk about building back better and the green benefits of our sector, but I also think the health benefits of our sector are very critical. And this is where the pulp and paper sector, I think, has a role to play. A lot of talk about personal protective equipment, the ability to provide for your own people. I know in Canada, we had a difficult few days in the middle of the pandemic when the President of the United States blocked some mask shipments into Canada to try to protect those for US use. And it really gave rise here to some conversations about our integrated value chain in Canada and about why are we exporting Canadian pulp to the US, Europe, and Asia, only to make masks that are then sent back to our country. So I think the environmental agenda and the green agenda is a huge opportunity for us. It's been a long-standing opportunity. I think the pulp and paper sector's opportunity in the health space is I know a growing opportunity that we're seeing in Canada. And in the case of Canada, kind of a made in Canada approach and what more can we. So as part of that navel gazing as we come out of the pandemic, I really think the domestic production, domestic manufacturing, the ability to provide for your own, and the health benefits of the pulp and paper sector are going to be pretty top of mind.
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. Thanks so much for that, and thanks to ICFPA for participating and being a part of this collaborative conversation, being one of the part of the flock of geese in the air. We're flying together. I do have to go to Karina as a way of summing up the evening before the day, depending on where you are. But let me just say thank you so much for all of those comments that have been coming in. One that really grabbed my attention was someone who said lots of alignment on supply and demand information, building a shared narrative, economy and environment. It all goes hand in hand. Build back better together has really resonated, it seems, out there. And we need momentum and leadership to make it happen. And they're looking towards FAO, of course, which is what the point of this is, to pick up some of those leadership roles. I think we heard from several speakers, such as Jennifer, for example, about some of these roles that can be helped to be filled through FAO. And so I think that no doubt that's all going to be taken on board. Other comments have come in, I'll just mention it to the panelists, around the certification side of things, the surety of what we're doing in forestry. How does that fit into it? How do we ensure that it's not just we who know what we're doing is right, but the regulatory and political and social paradigm is also, as Howard would say, very supportive of that idea, certification and other means of doing it. There's been questions about how the Global South fits into these conversations, how rural communities fit into it versus city communities, a whole range of comments that have been coming through. And I just wish we had another couple of hours to really traverse all of this terrain with this amazing panel of speakers. So thank you very much, speakers. I'm going to hand over to the chair of ACSFI, Karina Hakanson now, who I hope is going to pop up on our screens just to finally bring us all home and wrap up the evening. Thanks, Karina. Yes, is she, Sven, I think, has the mute button. We could be that she's...
Unmute now. Now?
There we are.
Thank you.
Thank
yes,
you,
I would like.
Karina.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross. And I would like to extend a big warm thank you to all the panelists for your wise, thoughtful reflections, ideas, and suggestions. And Ross, thank you also for your excellent moderating of this seminar. I think it has been very interesting and informative to listen to all the panelists and discussions. And I'm really sure that we can build back better, and I'm sure that we can also do that building with wood. If we start with a short summary and the key messages that I bring with me is that the forest sector and the forest industry, we have a sufficient capacity to respond to the impacts caused by COVID. We all know that this sector provides essential services during the pandemic, and we can provide substantial, sustainable contribution to build back better. And it is obvious and necessary that sustainable development goals provides a framework for guiding this process. And however, if the sector is to provide substantive, measurable, and sustainable solutions for the industry, for the society, and the environment in many countries, it's really important that the sector have a clear narrative that change perceptions of the sector. We need to define what the sector means by successfully building back better, and that is essential to the collection of data to guide this process. And all this can only be achieved if the sector works together, as we want to go far, and in coordination and in a multi-stakeholder based approach. And I think that is a strength of both ACSFI and FAO, as FAO is recognized globally for the important role it plays in convening power, its understanding and drive to implement the SDGs across the globe. And FAO is also known for its independent nature and the data and statistics that it collects and analyzes, which has helped understanding and guide trade and investments in the forest sectors for decades. And the ACSFI's role is to provide guidance from the private sector, the private forest sector, to FAO on the sustainable consumption and production of forest products. And I can see, and we got a lot of help from this seminar, that we in ACSFI can provide important support and guidance to FAO on how forest and forestry can contribute to build back better a post-COVID world. Especially I can see that ACSFI could provide guidance to FAO in facilitate effective cooperation among stakeholders, including the private sector, of course. And this should include defining what success in terms of building back better would look like for the forest sector in a post-COVID world. We could also facilitate an agreement between the various stakeholders on what data is required to guide the building back better process. And I can see that FAO, in collaboration with the private sector and other stakeholders, could lead the development of the narrative that forests and forest-based products can and should play in a leading role in delivering a resilient, renewable, better future. And this, of course, should be based on the goals of the SDGs. FAO code could also, with supporting from the private sector, lead the development of a strategy, or we can call it roadmap, for delivering success for global green growth and development. And this would include understanding key supply and demand dynamics for the global forest sector. And I also think that FAO has the capacity to provide technical support to all the stakeholders, including private sector, on the key methodologies and approaches, which contributes to identify and possibly upscale sustainable investment opportunities, addressing both sustainable development, community development, and employment and climate change. And most importantly, while FAO can help deliver on these challenges, opportunities, and requests, it will need inputs financially, intellectually and in the sharing of data to realize the goals that have been identified today. So thank you all. You have given us so many ideas, and we now have a lot to do. And last but not least, I also would like to thank you all of you who have participated in this seminar, and also great thank you Sven Walter and Lyndall Bull, who together with the Secretariat at FAO made this seminar possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina, and I add my thanks to my chairs, to the panelists and to the Secretariat, and to everyone who's contributed around the world. Over to you, Sven, in the Secretariat in Rome.
Oh, thank you very much, Ross, and thanks to everyone. I mean, it was an exciting session, and I think we learned a lot from the different perspectives. I will not repeat also all the great summary, you did, Ross and Karina. It's also 1:29, so we're also landing in time, which is great. Thanks in particular, of course, to all our participants. I think it was more than 200 at the peak time, which is great. In particular, of course, to our ACSFI members. We got a lot of questions in the chat, and again, we see how complex the whole situation is. I think we got some ideas already today. We will also look into the chat, and then, as we said, we will further digest what has been discussed today, and will report also back to FAO end of June. As most of you know, from FAO side, we had the committee on forestry planned end of June, which has been postponed, but we will use that time frame end of June to have a sequence of webinars to look into the broader sense, the impact of COVID on the forest sector. And so we will also have a follow-up event looking into the impact for the forest industries and looking at the forest industry side. So I'm sure that Karina, Ross, and others may join us also to this event, and we will definitely also inform the participants who registered today to join that event. So with this, again, thanks a lot to everyone. It is very late, very early to some of you. It was great to have you all around, and again, thanks a lot for all the questions, the comments. We have them well noted. As Ross, as you said, we did not touch upon all of them, but they will also guide us in our future activities. And I think, again, it's a good example of having an advisory committee on sustainable forest-based industry to do and facilitate this type of reflection and actually bring it back to us, to FAO. And we had, like, I think, more than 50 FAO colleagues there, and we can all digest this in-house in order to see what it means to us. So again, we can stop, I think, here. Thanking you all, and wishing you a good evening, a good day, and we will definitely stay all in contact. Thank you very much, and again, thanks to all the colleagues who joined us from all around the world. Bye-bye.